Take the exit. Turn right into the drive-thru.
Nope, I'm making dinner tonight.
You don't have time. Josh has practice.
Oh, that's right. I'll just get a salad.
And fries?
No, just the salad.
But salad cancels fries.
Salad only.
Fries.
Salad.
Fries.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. The affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on the road to successful weight loss.
Hey, can I get the...
Fries.
Salad. Sorry.
Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
Big Deal brands are up to 25% off right now at Designer Shoe Warehouse. You're not going to want to miss this. These brands almost never go on sale. At DSW, we'll give you something to brag about. Like up to 25% off select styles from Adidas, Crocs, Nike, Reebok, and more brands you love. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Save today at your DSW store or DSW.com. DSW, let us surprise you.
All right, so we're back on the Who Murdered Steve McNair, the Steve McNair murder, and we're still diving into this, and I was able to discover Amy Viteri, who was one of the reporters who covered this case early on in Nashville. She's no longer in Nashville. She's in Miami now at a NBC news station, but she's still a journalist. And Amy, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Amy, tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background in journalism, and how you started, and how you got involved in the journalism world.
Sure. So, I studied journalism. I actually got my master's degree in broadcast journalism because I studied literature in my undergrad years and got a master's degree, went on to do internships as we do in Washington, D.C. I grew up in the D.C. suburbs. So that's where I started working at one of the stations there, and ended up doing my first, sort of limited work for the local Telemundo station there in Washington, D.C. So doing a few pieces, little freelance stuff. And from there, I ended up in Nashville at the ABC affiliate there, WKRN, and I stayed there for 4.5, almost 5 years. And that was really my first English language stop in my broadcasting career. And then from there, I went on to work in Atlanta for several years. And then from Atlanta, I ended up in Miami, which is where I did my graduate degree. So I had some roots in Miami and ended up here, and I've been here ever since. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then when you were in Nashville, what kind of because that was probably your first big break there. And so tell us a little bit about your experience in Nashville and what kind of stories you covered.
So in Nashville, I was, very young, obviously just starting out. And it was at that point in my career where, you're filling in on every kind of shift and you're doing a little bit of everything yourself. Sometimes I was shooting my own video and editing my own stories. And other times you were paired with a photographer and really covering, what we call general assignment. So covering everything from traffic accidents to, in Nashville, of course, big music events, festivals. That's one of the cool things about working in a town like Nashville or Nash Vegas, as I remember they used to call it back then. You have so much going on. So it was really a wonderful place to work because it's a big city, but it's a small town at the same time, right? So you got to enjoy a lot of the fun events that go on in some of the bigger major cities in the country in a smaller environment. And so you really got to know the people that you covered. You could be covering a red carpet event and see someone like Dolly Parton one day, and then the next day you're covering, a major homicide or a major court case. And so it was really an interesting place to work, and every day was different in terms of the assignments that you got to cover.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, and for that to be your first jump into journalism, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was probably a little bigger of a market than I should have started in, but you know how that goes in this business. You jump at any opportunity to work.
Well, I think it's good. I mean, I started in Boston at the NBC affiliate in Boston as in journalism. I went to Emerson, and same thing. You just jump right in. You're like running around all night long and taking any assignment that you can get and just kind of running with it. So
absolutely. That's an even bigger bigger market, Boston. Yeah, that's quite a leap, but that's amazing. And exactly, you jump in and you do your best. You just work hard.
Exactly. But to have something like this happen in Nashville while you were there, I mean, that's...
Yeah, it was basically a convergence of, both like sports and hard news all at once with someone who was basically, an iconic figure in that town. And so let's talk a little bit about it. Like, July 4th, 2009, that's when all this happened, when they found Steve McNair in his condo with his girlfriend, Jenny Kazemi. And so let's talk a little bit about like how you first heard about it, and then what was, what the station tasked you with, and that's just the kind of, and how it kind of shook reverberations throughout like the town and what the talent's feeling, because you can definitely feel that it was a big major event.
Sure, it was. So just to give you sort of my personal point of view from that day, I was working an afternoon shift, what we call night side, right? So coming in around 2 o'clock, something like that. And I had actually, as you mentioned, it was the 4th of July. So I had actually just flown back in that morning from the DC area. I had gone home for a couple of days to visit my family. And so, when you're young, you can do that. You land and, drop your bag, a quick change, and head to work. And so, it was a Saturday. It was the 4th of July. So you think it will potentially, things can happen on the holidays, but I wasn't scheduled, in my recollection, to cover anything in particular, but I didn't even get the chance to get an assignment or figure out what we were covering, because it was sort of right when I was on my way in or just getting to the station. I was told, we have a shooting or a homicide. There's a crime scene down on 2nd Avenue, which was really close to where my TV station was located. It was just a few minutes down the road. So they said, we have a scene that we need you to go check out. Nothing to it, right? So just sort of, not that any homicide or crime investigation is a small thing, but we didn't have any details. And so we said, okay, we rode over there, me and my photographer. And at first it was just, your standard, the few initial responding officers were there. It was kind of like we were all getting there, around the same time. Someone had called in an incident, police were arriving, we showed up. So far, nothing out of the ordinary. But I think after a few minutes, we started seeing a lot more activity. And okay, that's not necessarily unusual, depending what they found inside. And it was after not that long that we started communicating. I remember one of my photographers who I worked with pretty closely started reaching out to me saying, hey, I'm hearing from a source, I'm hearing from a contact that this is Steve McNair, that this is a homicide, and that's Steve McNair inside that apartment. And my first reaction was, no, there's no way. It's not where we are, this place and this scene. He wouldn't be here on this time of day on the 4th of July. It just didn't make any sense. But then the scene started shifting, right? The scene started getting bigger. We started seeing, more important people in the Metro Nashville Police Department showing up, and a lot more activity, sort of like, top brass and, the big PIOs, which normally wouldn't respond to a scene like this. Certainly not on the 4th of July. They were very hardworking, but, this is a Saturday on the 4th of July and everybody's showing up. And so within, some period of time, and of course we started asking, okay, we started all reaching out to our own sources. Our assignment desk was working on this, trying to get confirmation. And eventually, we were able to confirm that this was in fact a homicide involving Steve McNair and another person inside that condo. And it was just, difficult to get your head around that. And then, of course, as the day went on and we started learning more about the circumstances, it was just a constantly developing story, as you can imagine, for that entire long day. But to this day, I'll never forget just sort of my incredulity at hearing Steve McNair. I mean, your first thought is no way.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was like an icon in that city. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about that. Like, who was Steve McNair in Nashville at that time?
So exactly. Sorry, I'm trying to quiet something down here in the background. So Steve McNair, of course, for anybody who's a football fan, which is, a lot of Americans, you knew who Steve McNair was. He was a very talented, at that time, recently retired NFL quarterback. He was an icon in the city of Nashville, where he had played for the Titans for so many years. I guess, the Titans having been the Oilers, for those who remember that. And then he really just led that franchise to so many great moments, and then had recently retired after going to Baltimore. I'm going to get this wrong, for 1 or 2 seasons. I can't remember how long it was, but he was back in Nashville. So he had a home in Nashville. He had his family in Nashville. He had, business ventures and community activities, I believe, camps and different things where he had real ties to this community, and people loved him in Nashville. So not only was he this celebrity, right, this larger than life, NFL superstar who had, that whole thing going for him, he was really a member of that community. He was somebody who was involved. He was known everywhere he went. I mean, he was a true celebrity. So a celebrity because of, his sports career, and then just a star in that town, and somebody that people generally liked. I mean, Nashville's a friendly town, but this was a guy that was doing good things in the community, was active, gave back. And so people were devastated. And obviously a young person, a young man, had just retired, had that whole next chapter of his life in front of him, had a family. And this was just a huge loss. People really took this hard.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I'm sure he was the king of the town there based upon that. I mean, he brought the Titans to one of their first Super Bowl in a long time. And so going back to that day where you guys were finding out piecemeal and the scene was escalating, and when you confirmed it was Steve McNair and someone else, did they tell you who the other person was right away, or how long did it take before you found out it was Jenny Kazemi?
That's a good question. And now, forgive me, it's been so long. I don't remember if we had the name that day, but I do believe we were getting information that he was in that condominium with a young woman, unknown to us initially. So it was clear, this wasn't, his wife or a family member or somebody that was well known in the public. That the name didn't initially come out, and I can't remember at which point authorities officially identified her for us. But of course, the tips or unconfirmed details started coming in that he was in there, with a woman, maybe a girlfriend. And that was then another piece of the puzzle, like who is this girl? And that is something that the coverage over the several following weeks and months, really, that took on a life of its own, right? Who she was, the photos that started to emerge from, Nashville nightlife moments. And you could see that this was an individual who, was out, going out, spending time at different, bars or clubs in the town. And so we were able to see certain pictures of her. This was really before social media, the way it exists right now, was as common. So you didn't have the benefit of just finding their profile and this wealth of videos of them or, their Instagram stories. That wasn't really something that we had access to. So in those days, gosh, it wasn't that long ago, but how things have changed, how quickly. It was more, nightclub photographers or, websites from different parties around town. So we were piecing these things together. And then, of course, you've probably seen there were photos from, and these would have been, private photos from vacations, like trips that they had even taken together. So we started to understand that this was a relationship of sorts that had lasted for several months. And these people, that Steve and this young woman, Sahel Jenny Kazemi, had spent a significant amount of time together, or done some things together, traveled together, gone out together. And, you'll probably touch on this, but Nashville was still a pretty small town. So if you were going out with people to, there were only a handful of, hot spots or clubs or bars that people liked to frequent, and people knew each other. So if you were going out with people and, people would see you and recognize you, I guess the point I'm getting at is, it wasn't a secret that he was, spending time with this person. Now, the nature of their relationship, or, how well they knew each other or what they were to one another, of course, that was less clear, but it wasn't something that he had necessarily tried to hide, spending time in public in the city with her. And that was something, of course, we learned much more about in the following weeks.
Yeah. I mean, when we talked earlier last week, you talked a little bit about when you were at the scene and how you were getting information, and that at one point they allowed you inside the condo to take a look at some of the things. So can you kind of walk us through what you experienced there?
So, yes, that didn't happen the day of the homicide or when that call came in and the initial crime scene. But I will say that this was a case where, as you know, every law enforcement agency has different protocols and handle cases like this differently. Certainly, this was a high profile incident, and so maybe a little bit outside of the norm for what we had seen working with the police department in Nashville at the time, and certainly different from anything I've ever seen since. So I want to be clear that this was kind of a unique experience. This was a unique experience for me covering a homicide. But in the days following this incident, I have to believe, in the interest of being transparent or allowing certain media to see parts of this crime scene, the police department allowed several journalists, I was one of them, to go into this condo, which had been processed at this time as a crime scene. So they had been able to gather any evidence or done what they needed to do in that location, but they allowed us to go in there, but not with a camera. So my photographer stayed outside of the unit and recorded video of me walking up, and I wore a microphone, and I was able to walk through this condo and sort of narrate, at least audio, of what I was seeing and describe that scene and document it that way for our viewers. And this was obviously an incident that people had so many questions about. People wanted to know every detail of how this could happen, what had happened. And so I do remember walking in, and it was, you would go up a set of steps and there was a doorway, and the living room area, I guess you could describe it, was off to the left. And there was sort of a kitchen area straight ahead. And I believe there was a bathroom over there as well. And on the area where the couch or the sofa was in the living room area, you could see the blood stains from what had happened, there on the sofa, as well as on the, I believe there was carpet on the floor. And that really was, the most visible evidence of what had happened there, and what was left behind at that point. So that was what we were able to see, basically the layout of this location where this crime took place and evidence of what had happened there, and sort of describe that to the viewers. But of course, not a lot of the other key evidence, so shell casings, positions of where things were. We were able to see only what was left behind in that space.
Interesting. And then at what point on that day in 4th of July did they release the fact that it was what they believed was a murder-suicide?
Okay, you'll have to forgive me. I can't remember at what point, but I believe it was that day. It was that same day that they shared that. And now I can't remember. It was initially, double homicide, if you will. I don't remember if they labeled it. But if it wasn't that day, it was very, very shortly, within a short time period. It wasn't a long time we were not, for example, given any information about, are you looking for a shooter? Is there a gunman or woman out there in the community who's a threat? I do believe that the feeling was that whatever had happened in there was contained to that condo, that we were not looking for someone. I don't believe that message was ever, communicated with us. So, you were able to infer pretty quickly that, okay, whatever took place here was contained to this location and these people. But you'll have to forgive me because
that's okay. That's okay.
I don't remember the exact.
No worries. And I just, what was your reaction to that news when they announced that they believed it was a murder suicide?
That's a surprising thing to hear, especially involving someone like him. He was a guy who, to the outside observer, to the casual observer, was well liked and wouldn't have been a target for something like this. He wasn't a guy that had public enemies or, that was frequently embroiled in controversy. And so to hear that somebody had taken his life and potentially taken their own was a shock. Of course, to hear that he had been the victim of a homicide was a shock, no matter the circumstances. But certainly then his own personal life and relationships with not just this young woman, but others, became the focus of a lot of media scrutiny. And it was just, it must have been, I would imagine, difficult for those close to him to lose him and then have him under this microscope scrutinizing so many aspects of his private personal life.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, it's bad enough to lose your son or your father or your loved one, and then you have to hear about all of this negativity about his personal life that's most true or not true. You don't know. It's all speculation, rumors, and whatnot. But I'm curious, for the other homicide scenes that you had gone into as a reporter, was this different than the others? Like, obviously, it's a high-profile case. They're not allowing you to bring cameras in. Had you been allowed into other homicide scenes before with your cameras?
No, not specifically by the police department. So, as you know, how it normally works is you're not allowed in while the tape is up and they're processing scenes or conducting their investigation. When they leave, when they're finished, if they don't need to keep that scene secure, everybody's out. Sometimes they'll station a patrol officer nearby if they don't want anybody going to the scene for that time being, for whatever reason that may be. But usually once they leave, they aren't involved in that location any longer. And it depends on what it is. Is it a private residence where there are people who are willing to let you inside? Mm-hmm. In those scenarios, we've been able to go inside and see what happened. If it's private property and it's locked up, we're not allowed to access that. So without the property owner saying, sure, let me unlock it for you and come on in, we're not allowed to trespass legally. So, but in terms of police saying, hey, come on in and check this out, or we're going to give you access to this scene, I can't say that I've ever had the opportunity to do that.
That's what I wanted people to understand, that they did. They were trying to be transparent. They said, come in and look. They wanted you to see the inside. That's what the point is, because I've never heard of that before.
No, it was the first time and the last time.
Right. I mean, it's like very, very rare that that's going to happen. But, maybe high profile cases are different because they want to make sure that there's other witnesses there. There's other, there's media. They're not trying to hide anything. So when you started to dig into this case a little bit, or at least covering it, did you start to see any kind of discrepancies, or that maybe the narrative that was being played out wasn't exactly all of it, the whole story?
So what a lot of the focus was on in those initial weeks was trying to even understand who these individuals all were and how they connected to each other. So the discrepancies weren't, if to the extent that there were any, were not something that were apparent immediately, in the sense that a lot of these things, so whether it's incident reports, autopsy or toxicology results. All of those things were pending for quite some time. And as you know, while they're, not approved or not finalized, you don't have access to that. So what the initial focus was on for us was identifying, okay, who is this person and how did they know each other? And that really became the focus, as well as, if you recall, investigators also did something which I've never seen since, was release a trove of communication between these two people, between Kazemi and McNair, that sort of painted a picture of the nature of their relationship and the way they were communicating with each other. And as you know, their belief was that this was a young woman who wanted to hold on to this relationship. And according to, anecdotal evidence, it was a relationship that perhaps McNair was not as invested in at that point in time. And that was perhaps the reason that this went off the rails and this young woman took this action because of financial distress, emotional distress. So those were a lot of the information that was being given to us. And then, of course, trying to piece together, what we did really focus on was where Steve McNair had been that night. Retrace his steps. So how did he get here? How did she get here? And, what we understood from both talking to people in the community and going out and piecing together where he had been, because as I said, Nashville was a small town. So he went somewhere people knew, right?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
And he had been, out that night and with a friend, not with her, but she had been in communication with him that night. And if I recall correctly, I don't have the text messages in front of me, but she had been trying to get together with him that night and maybe meet up or go out. And he, I believe in an initial message, had told her that he was tied up with his family, that he wasn't able to meet up at that point in time because he was with his family or he was home. In fact, he was out at a different bar with friends and perhaps, who knows, not ready to meet up or didn't want to meet up at that time. And then it was, I think, later in the night or early morning hours that I think he had agreed to meet up with her and have her, come by. And so that was how it seemed. She ended up at the condo that night, very late at night. And presumably he may have already been asleep when she got there. But in terms of the investigation itself and the information that we were receiving, I know eventually investigators did sort of lay out the fact that this Miss Kazemi had tried to, and they said, purchased a gun from this guy, Gilliam, I believe.
Yeah, Andrew Gilliam, yeah.
And that, she had met him, or they knew they had crossed paths, and he was a convicted felon, and that
convicted murderer.
Yes, in Florida, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that, so was the story, if I recall, that they had met at Dave and Buster's, like everybody, I guess, in this story was meeting at Dave and Buster's. I know Dave and Buster's was a very popular place in Nashville. So, and she worked there, of course.
Yep.
So that was where she worked, and allegedly she had met this Adrian Gilliam, and asked him to purchase a gun, and he had told investigators that I think she paid $100 for it or something to that effect.
Well, that's what he said.
That's his story. Yeah.
So that was what we were hearing, that he had provided her with this gun, and that she had paid him $100. And then, of course, the reporting showed that they may have had some kind of relationship too, or that he was interested in her, and the whole thing just became very sort of a big spider web of, and she had had her boyfriend at the time, or previous, I guess they had broken up while she was,
Keith Norfleet. Yeah.
And so that was, the information that came out, that this was the gun that she had purchased from this guy, and that he had told investigators, admitted to selling this gun to her, and that's how she came to be in possession of the weapon that she allegedly used that night in this crime.
So what was the general scuttlebutt from all the other journalists in the area? Because is a small town, big city, small town type thing, where what were all the other journalists and everything? I mean, because obviously we cover these things on, and we've been on those scenes, and there's definitely a lot of talk amongst other journalists to try to figure out, all right, what are you hearing? And something like this, when you guys are all kind of initially kind of left in the dark, you're trying to piece together the story. You're trying to find out, what did this person know? What did this person know? So what was the general consensus as far as how you felt amongst all you other journalists, or even within your news station, what you thought was really going on?
So, I can't speak for some of the other journalists. And to be honest, it wasn't at the time, I don't recall open vocal conversations in the initial aftermath saying that this doesn't make sense, this doesn't add up. I think what I remember...
Life is full of choices, but the choice between getting crispy chicken nuggets or a Crunchwrap slider isn't one you'll have to make. The new crispy chicken Crunchwrap slider at Taco Bell. All white meat chicken nuggets, breaded in tortilla chips, wrapped up, sauce and all, inside a slider-sized Crunchwrap. Choose from creamy chipotle or jalapeno honey mustard. Well, there we go. Life, still full of choices. The new crispy chicken Crunchwrap slider. A brand new classic. Only at Taco Bell. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time and while supplies last.
You tell yourself, no one wants your college-era band tees. But on Depop, people are searching for exactly what you've got. You once paid a small fortune for them at merch stands. Now, a teenager who calls them vintage will offer that same small fortune back. Sell them easily on Depop. Just snap a few photos and we'll take care of the rest. Who knew your questionable music taste would be a money-making machine? Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
From that time was that it felt like, and forgive this expression, like drinking from a fire hose. Like it just felt like so much was coming out from so many different directions. And it was difficult to sort of make sense of all of it and understand how this happened. And I do remember that there was chatter, but it was not based on any specific aspect. There was just some skepticism among some that this just doesn't make sense. Not because, this piece of evidence here proves that it didn't, or this is contradictory at that time, right, in those initial weeks after the crime. But there were a lot of people that were, there was a little bit of disbelief that this happened the way it was being explained. There was, journalists are always skeptical of everything that they're told, no matter who tells them. So there's always a healthy dose of skepticism, or, okay, that doesn't really make sense, or trying to get things to add up. But I don't remember anybody in the initial weeks or months after this happened, pointing to one specific thing that early in the game. Saying, no, that this is impossible. And because, they would have immediately taken the authorities to task with that question or that piece of information. And, how do you explain this? But of course, in the long term, months and years after that, there have been several people who have brought up questions about whether other people's stories make sense, like Gilliam's himself, and, questions about where he was that night, and other people, like the people who showed up to the crime scene that day. That was an issue that was a question then and remains a question to this day. Why so much time lapsed between Steve McNair being found there in that condo and someone calling 911.
This is a thing. This is a thing, and we see this a lot. And when you're telling the truth and your friend is dead on the ground, you're not going to wait to call 911.
Right.
I just don't understand that part. That was the part for me where I was just like, wait a minute, that's not, something's wrong here. That doesn't.
Well, especially since the person that actually discovered them called someone else.
called Robert.
And then they still didn't call 911. They waited till Robert Gaddy
Right? Yeah.
to get there. And then initially, then they waited another 45 to 55 minutes before they called 911. I mean, what's going on at that point? I mean, you show up, if that was, my friend or a business associate, someone that I was close to, because Robert Gaddy went to Alcorn State with him and was his bodyguard at one point, then a business partner, very close relationship. That to me is a red flag. Why anybody would wait that long to call, 911.
And I don't recall off the top of my head, was his name Wayne Neely? Was that
the other gentleman? Yeah.
Associate who he was the co-owner, I believe. Of
yes, I think so. Yeah, I believe so.
I don't recall what brought him there that day. Has that been why he showed up to the unit that day and discovered, because obviously no one called him, or I don't know if somebody else called him wondering where Steve was. So I can't recall that detail, because I'm sure it was relayed to us at the time about how Mr. Neely came to stop by the condo that day and find McNair there. And yes, that was relayed to us very early on, that this was sort of the sequence of events, that Neely then called Robert Gaddy, who then came himself to the location. And after also going inside and seeing what Neely had already seen, at some point after that, called 911. And what I will say about that is, I agree with you, Cindy. That doesn't make any sense to me. And that's not something that I would do. I have frequently run into this in my reporting, when you interview somebody who's been through something, and you look, I think we call it, like a sympathetic character, right? Like, do they make sense? Like, are viewers going to identify with what they're saying, or are they going to have so many questions about how this person handled the situation? We cover the story regardless, but we are always aware of what impression this story might make on viewers, what questions they may have, so that we can attempt to answer those in our reporting for people. And I do know that, the expression everybody grieves differently, or everybody handles shock differently. That's true. I've seen that. I've seen people do things that make no sense to me whatsoever after an event like this. But there is no disputing your point that it's not typical, and it raises questions that, why would you wait so long? Did you confirm that they were deceased at that point? Was there a chance that, we know now there wasn't, but if I was finding somebody laying on the ground with a gunshot wound, I would perhaps wonder, if I call 911, could I possibly help them? Is there something
exactly
right? As opposed, and I know, sometimes people are gone, and that's evident, but I would also personally have a concern that people are going to wonder what I was doing for those 40 minutes or an hour and a half. You want to report something like that as quickly as possible. And any law enforcement officer will tell you that. Why this took so long, I believe, did Robert Gaddy say he was sort of in shock, or, mourning, or couldn't believe it? I don't remember what the real reason given for that was. Or was there something you wanted to protect? Were you worried about his reputation, how this would look? Who knows?
I would agree with that if they didn't release all those text messages about the affair and all that stuff. That, to me, releasing all that information to the media so early on, really kind of changes the scope and the narrative of the case for the audience, right? So everyone's now thinking, oh my God, the guy we thought was here and all this amazing things was living this double life. So sure, that makes sense. I just
at risk. Yeah.
It was so early on to release that material. Usually it takes a while.
When we discovered that the police investigation basically only took 4 days.
Yeah.
We've been doing this a long time. We have a lot of friends who are homicide detectives and federal agents. And when we kind of run that by them, they said, one of my friends said, he goes, even if we had a video of it happening, it would have taken longer than 4 days to fully investigate this case. So, I thought that was kind of a little bit, that was for me and a lot of the people at we know in law enforcement was a red flag. How can you close out a case that quickly? And, you know, especially when they did talk to people about Jenny Kazemi, it's like she had never owned a gun before. She had never fired a gun before. She was a tiny girl in comparison to the 6'2", 6'3", you know, Steve McNair, and that there were no signs, even with those texts, that there was any kind of problems going on between them. So it's like, if anything, she looked like, you know, and she wasn't like, apparently he wasn't the only person that she was having a relationship with. And vice versa. He was, and, you know, and for like, you know, we all, NFL players are like rock stars. Okay. I said, so, you know, they get, you know, women opportunities with women and partners very easily, and people want everyone wants to touch the light, you know, they want to feel the fame. And so it's not uncommon for that to happen. And it's not surprising with an NFL football player who travels around, plays. So it's not unheard of. So it's like, that part wasn't surprising at all. But what was surprising is just how the murder scene, some of the circumstances that we heard that happened prior to with his relationship with Robert Gaddy, I guess taking $13,000 from him and him discovering it, and then he started to have some reservations about his friendship and partnership with him, and was planning on confronting him about that. So so there's a lot of things that, you know, point in other directions independent to what they're, plus the fact that, you know, we talked to Vincent Hill quite a bit, who was a former Nashville PD, who's actually written a book about this, and who's actually taken on the case for Steve McNair's mother, you know, who's been still actively pursuing it. He's a journalist now. And some of the things that he's revealed, that he's really kind of done a deep dive on the phone records and everything. It's pretty astonishing that they made those conclusions so quick and made that judgment. Now, whether or not, because he was an NFL star, they just wanted to kind of wrap this up. I mean, there's been tons of cases, obviously O.J. Simpson being one of the most famous, you know, but there's a lot of NFL stars. At least you hear at least one or two of them a year get involved in something like this, whether it's drugs, whether it's speeding or it's, you know, or whether it's a homicide. So it's not unusual for this to happen, but the way this looked just didn't seem right. I mean, we're just coming in. I always thought it was kind of weird until we started really kind of looking into this case. And actually the family came to us to kind of look at this case and kind of like profile it. And so it just didn't make sense. A lot of this stuff doesn't make sense.
What does his mother, has she shared if she has a belief or because, you know, in the way that this panned out, the way this all happened, according to investigators and the way they concluded this investigation, Steve was obviously a victim of violence, right? Does his mother believe that he was obviously a victim of violence, but at the hands of somebody who has never, you know, seen justice for what they've done, or does she just have questions? You know, I
think she's got quite. We haven't spoken to her yet. Vincent speaks to her still, but let's just put it this way: she was very thankful for Vincent, who's been looking into this case since, you know, it happened. So it's been quite a bit of time. So I would imagine that she definitely feels like there's some unresolved questions surrounding her son's death.
And I know that, and I can't remember what year it was, Vincent was able to take some of the information that he had and get it before a grand jury in Nashville to review the possibility, if I'm not mistaken, of reopening this investigation. I mean, it even made it to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly what was in, you know, his presentation or what that panel was able to review, but they ultimately decided that there was not enough there for them to, you know, support reopening this investigation.
Yeah.
there's more information that's come out since then? Or do you think that was simply a mistake at the time, that there was enough to look at that moment?
That's a really good question. We'd have to ask Vincent that. We talked to him a lot. We're actually going to be talking to him very soon. But yeah, I mean, I just feel like on these high profile cases, because we've covered quite a few of them, that they either one or two things. If they don't have enough information to kind of wrap it up, they either drag out the investigation and to where it's not cold, it's not officially cold, but it goes cold because they're not really looking into it. And they hope it just goes away because they have so much other case files they have to deal with. And they try to kind of dim the light on it as much as possible. And then, you know, and if they do have enough to kind of basically say, listen, we can draw a conclusion here real quick. Let's wrap this up, package it up. You have a high profile person. You have, you know, this is going to be a drain on our resources. We're going to have news coverage from this for 6 months to a year. People outside the city are going to be covering this. It's not going to be good. Let's figure out a way to kind of wrap this up. Plus the fact you have a multi or $1 billion organization like the NFL who doesn't want it to be linger either, and they want some resolution as well.
What I think is interesting, if I could, you know, looking at it now in hindsight as a journalist, you know, not as someone involved, but the questions, so there are all of the questions, you know, I know you've mentioned without going into detail, because I haven't reviewed some of this evidence, but you've mentioned, you know, there are some potential red flags with some of the evidence or some discrepancies, some things that maybe don't match where they should, that have, you know, raised questions for you about how this investigation was handled and how these conclusions were drawn. And maybe almost it sounds like whether certain people were looked at closely enough that could have been or maybe should have been. I guess the questions I would ask as a journalist are, you know, if that happened, you know, hypothetically speaking here, I have no information that an investigation was not handled appropriately, and I would never go, you know, and suggest that. If that were the case, it is interesting because I know you mentioned expediency would have been, of course, a priority. I mean, you don't want this to go unsolved, and you want, you know, to draw conclusions quickly for everyone involved, everyone who's interested, which was the whole city, you know, the country at that point. But all of these people, you know, all of these players, so to speak, you know, Robert Gaddy, who, as you mentioned, and that was, you know, documented, that was reported on, that he had, you know, business dealing with McNair and reportedly taken money, you know, thousands of dollars, and that had caused some friction in their relationship. And it sounds like, you know, had not been resolved at the time that Steve McNair was killed. Gilliam, you know, where he was that night, and I know where records showed him to be, and all of these people. I guess my question is, investigators knew all of these things and would have had access to these people. So if anyone else is or was responsible, I mean, they had, I would think, the opportunity to pursue those leads, so to speak. And I wouldn't think that, you know, I don't think there was anybody who had, you know, political connections or anybody who was untouchable in this investigation, which, you know, you've seen in some places or in some places where people are sort of protected. You know, everyone, I think from the outside looking in, would have been fair game in this investigation. So why not?
You would think.
Why not push a Robert Gaddy if you have suspicions, or an Gilliam, you know, an Andrew Gilliam about, you know, where were you that night? Or, you know, it would be difficult to think that, you know, there was evidence pointing in another direction that just wasn't pursued. I find myself asking, for what reason? I mean, I'm sure, you know, most, if not all, homicide investigators I've ever come across are really passionate about their jobs, as you know. I mean, they really want to close these cases and hold people accountable. And if something like that happened in this case, it would truly be, not unique in the sense that, you know, investigators get it wrong sometimes. They do.
Listen, They did pursue other leads. That we know, because Keith Northrup, who was Fleet, was Jenny's boyfriend prior, and still had, you know, connection to her. He was still talking to her. They were still kind of on a friendly basis. You know, the police looked at him early on because he had written a song that had some that alluded to that he wrote, I guess, during their breakup or something like that. So they kind of were targeting him as well. So it's like, and so when you hear Keith's story, I mean, he's got some interesting stuff to say about this because, when you have someone who, because if anything, he knew her better than anybody. He had been with her for a while. They met in Florida and then they moved to Nashville together and they lived together for a while. I mean, they were talking about, getting married and stuff like that. And then prior to her getting involved with McNair. So his story is really kind of compelling, and some of the stuff that he's kind of being literally on the inside of this story and being part of it and being implicated early on. But it just, I don't know. I just felt like, and we both do, the more and more we look into it and having the benefit of having someone like Vincent Hill who early on and knows the Nashville Police Department, having been a police officer there and knowing a lot of the other people. And he's told us that there was people in the department who were a little bit questioning what really happened and how they investigated it. And he's not coming from like a feeling perspective. He's coming from, because he became a private investigator. Right. And so he's got receipts and he's got things laid out enough to actually take it to a grand jury. So when you have that level of doubt and, reasonable doubt, you would think, all right, well, there's got to be, maybe there's something else going on here. And that's what we're doing. We're just kind of looking at all the stuff. And because he was such a pivotal figure in both pop culture and in the local Nashville, I mean, it just.
Yeah.
I agree with you though, Amy, though, why wouldn't they have just followed that lead? They really went hard after Keith, the boyfriend.
Yeah. So why him and not others if they didn't? Again, purely as an outsider here.
Right.
I don't know that they did or didn't.
I don't either know yet for sure. I mean, we know from what Vincent's told us, but I haven't seen, I haven't spoken to those investigators who were on the ground that day.
Yeah, we've actually tried to get a hold of them.
But I am curious, like, why didn't, or if they did, what did they come up with? That's just been
right. Were there dead ends? I mean, you would think that that all of this would be documented. I mean, there would be those case files should be completely public record, which the benefit of what you guys are doing now, which is so great, you can go back years later and review all of it, all of the evidence that, sometimes for years after a crime takes place, not ready for public release, well, now it all should be. And it's helpful to look at all of the information in its entirety. And only that way, are you able to see like more of a complete picture. And it would be interesting to see what the actual, files and reports from the homicide investigators show about some of the individuals that people have brought up or had questions about. And did they, pursue those and what came of them? And, that would be fascinating to see. And you mentioned that, Jenny had come with Keith, or I believe she came to Tennessee when she was just 16 years old.
Yeah, she was young.
Yeah.
She was young.
I think that's something that's lost in all of this. Not that has any bearing on whether a young person can commit a crime like this or not. We've certainly seen it happen.
Sure.
Before. But I just think, she was just 16 years old when she left her home, or the home that she had. I know that she had lost her mother, years ago as a small child in, the country where she was from. And it's a really sad story all around, because a 16-year-old girl, with a boyfriend in a state where she's never been before. I mean, you're just so vulnerable. And, this prolific, man who had so many great things ahead of him, I'm sure. It's just, it really is a tragic story. I know why people care so much and want to get to the bottom of it, because, it's something you look back on and think none of this had to happen.
None of it had to happen. No. And for one of the hooks for me was Jenny, because I feel like she's just been maligned in this whole thing as the person that did this. And after digging into some of the stuff that we've looked into just to touching on it the past few months. It's sad to me that that's the case, because I don't believe that she pulled that trigger after reading some of these things and learning some of these things, because I just don't think, I don't think it was possible for someone of her stature and someone of her nature and someone who didn't have a history of this. She was also a young girl. I mean, as a young girl running around in Nashville, dating a bunch of football players, he wasn't the only one. It wasn't like, I mean, from talking to people that knew her, she wasn't depressed. She wasn't destitute. He was giving money to her. There's a lot of things that
there
just
were records showing that he had transferred some money.
Yeah, I mean,
water or Escalade. I mean, it's like
some of it's just not making sense. And I just, after reading a lot of this stuff, my opinion of this whole thing has changed. And I think that who she was needs to be remembered. She was a young girl, and it's unfortunate.
But from the Nashville PD's point of view, I mean, this was a nice package for them that they can kind of, because they don't, when you rule a murder suicide like that, there's no one to charge. There's nothing else to look at. There's no trial. There's nothing else. So they can just kind of package it and they can kind of close the case based upon the thing. And the other thing that I thought was interesting that Vincent told us that he has files that there was several different reports from several different officers on where the gun was. So it wasn't one like there was discrepancies in that. So it's like, how is that? How did the gun move? Did someone move the gun, or who's seeing it? It's I've been on crime scenes. I've done over 200 homicides where I've been under the yellow tape. It's frozen. Yeah. They don't touch anything.
I mean, you mentioned that. I haven't seen that, so I can't speak to it. And that is interesting. And if I was investigating a story, right now, if I were looking into this case, for example, and I had those reports and I would note those discrepancies, and that would stand out to me. And I would ask the department about that, because is there an explanation? Did, this rookie make a really bad mistake and move the gun and he got suspended for 3 months? Or, are you guys just really bad at writing reports? And
it could be.
That, but it's a legitimate red flag to say these don't add up. And that is your biggest piece of evidence. What can you tell us about these discrepancies in these reports? And I think that's a great question, and one I would love to, if those reports show that the gun was in different places, I would absolutely love to hear, if there's a way to reconcile those.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, this is all new information for us. I mean, we're evolving this thing. I mean, like I said, Vincent's a huge resource because he's, obviously he's written a book about it. He's investigated this since 2009, and he's really pushed on this. And so, in addition to him and Keith Norfleet and some of the other people that we're talking to, it's interesting, but I'd love to hear it from the horse's mouth. I'd love to get, because the detectives are retired right now. I'd love to talk to one of them to get their perspective, because they may
spoken recently, right?
Yeah, they have. I think they have spoken stuff like that. But I'd love to get a perspective from them to kind of see what that was going through their mind. Maybe there is something there that they saw that we didn't see. Because
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think either way, so many people have questions, and so many people have wondered about this case for so many years. So whether they clarify and say, there's a great reason for that, and here it is, or there is no answer and it only, raises further questions, I think both are so important, and people would love to know, right?
Yeah.
The answer to that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, my opinion is my opinion. That's fine. But the facts are the facts. If she did pull the trigger, fine. But there are some discrepancies in some of the files and some of the things that we've seen just, digging into this. And that's what we kind of want clarification on is why.
Sure.
Why are there some discrepancies?
I hope that that's something that can be answered, because
we may never find out why. That's the whole thing. It's the fact that some of the family members are still interested in this. That's key.
It is, and they're not the only ones. And I know they've been through so much. And I know I told you, when we spoke before briefly, that's something I'm always aware of. That this young woman has a family, and people who care about her and care about her memory. And Steve McNair has a family and people who care about him and care about his memory. And so, you know, whatever comes out of this, or clarification or lack thereof, you know, I'm always thinking about those people, and, you know, they deserve answers, and they deserve peace, you know, both. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate, you know, you guys taking the time to be so diligent and look into something that people have wondered about, you know.
Yeah.
Some people, I should say, some people have wondered about for a long time, or just wondered, you know, maybe wanted to know more about how the decisions were reached, or how we got here. So.
Yeah. And that's, you know, like I said, we were reached out by them. So it was like, that's how a lot of times we get our cases. People reach out, hey, listen, this is what happened. What do you guys think? And then we start poking around, because we get requests all the time.
Sure.
But this one's an interesting one, because I'm, you know, obviously I'm a huge football fan, and I have a lot of friends who work in that community and talk about it all the time. But anyway, we really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Amy.
If we do have anything else that's interesting that we'd like to share with you, we'd love to have you on again to kind of share with you.
Please, I would. You've piqued my curiosity. Now I want to do some open records requests myself, but I don't want to step on your toes. I'll let you guys. But
We'll send you what we have. We'll send what we have.
I would be happy to take a look, you know, from my perspective, and you know, just we could keep the discussion going. But
fantastic. All right.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Have a great day, both of you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is a Monday.com ad. The same Monday.com helping people worldwide getting work done faster and better. The same Monday.com designed for every team and every industry. The same Monday.com with built-in AI, scaling your work from day one. The same Monday.com that your team will actually love using. The same Monday.com with an easy and intuitive setup. Go to Monday.com and try it for free. Yes, the same Monday.com.
This podcast is supported by MIDI Health. Are you in midlife, feeling dismissed, unheard, or just plain tired of the old healthcare system? You're not alone. In fact, even today, 75% of women seeking care for menopause and perimenopause issues are left entirely untreated. But it's time for a change. It's time for MIDI. MIDI's not just a healthcare provider. It's a women's telehealth clinic founded and supported by world-class leaders in women's health. Their clinicians provide one-on-one, face-to-face consultations where they truly listen to your unique needs. They offer a full range of holistic, data-driven solutions that isn't one-size-fits-all care. This is care uniquely tailored for you. At MIDI, you will find that their mission is clear: to help all women thrive in midlife, giving them access to the healthcare they deserve. Because they believe midlife isn't the middle at all. It is the beginning of your second act. Ready to feel your best and write your second act script? Visit joinmidi.com today to book your personalized, insurance-covered virtual visit. That's joinmidi.com. MIDI, the care women deserve.